Welcome to Butterflies of Wisdom, everyone. Yes, you're going to be sick and tired of hearing my voice by the time Thursday rolls around. But this afternoon, I have Miss Victoria with me. Miss Victoria is a social media expert, and so I'm going to let Victoria take it away.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate it. I'm happy to be here. Yes, I am a social media expert, or a fixer, as many of my friends and colleagues and clients call me, which is why my nickname is actually Vix, because I always have the fix for every digital need. I started working in content creation, so Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, blogs, you name it, I do it. And then I also do video, websites, everything related to promoting who you are, what you sell, and a little bit about, your brands and your business online. I handle that for clients of all shapes and sizes.
Well, how cool is that? And so what would you suggest that someone do, i.e. me, to grow their Twitter following?
To grow their which social media? All of them?
Twitter.
So Twitter is a little bit of a beast. It's definitely one of the ones that is more time intensive, takes a lot of time to grow your Twitter, and you also need a lot of content. My Twitter actually is verified, and I have some pretty influential people following me from my work and also from the kind of content that I share. Hashtags are not as important on Twitter as they are on Instagram. In fact, you should actually use 2 or less, as those are the tweets with more engagement. But it's really about connecting. Like Twitter is, if you think of social media altogether as a great big party, Twitter is kind of like the speed dating version of that party, where you're trying to go into as many conversations and meet as many people as possible in a very short period of time. So it's quick bursts of information and content, and I really focus on curating, which means resharing and re-promoting the right sources at the right time. So Twitter is more about who you know, not necessarily what you know.
And that being said, how would you suggest someone build up their Facebook page? Because Facebook has changed the algorithm so much now that I don't hang out on Facebook. People have tried to get me over the years to hang out on Facebook, especially the disabled community, quite frankly. And I just don't have time for it. I have time for Twitter. I don't have time for Facebook. Plus, Facebook and its battery has an issue on mobile phones.
Yeah, I mean, that is true. It depends on what kind of phone you're working. Mobile in general brings its own set of challenges. I would say that the best way to grow your Facebook is actually to run Facebook ads and also use an influencer campaign. So influencers are people who have big social media followings who will share your content with their audience, and hopefully, usually, their audience will also kind of piggyback on that and become fans of yours. But Facebook really is, as I always say to clients and colleagues, a pay-to-play universe now. So if you want to grow, you definitely have to invest money in advertising on Facebook.
I figured you would say that. And Instagram is a little bit easier because hashtags, excuse coughing attack, hashtags could be used. And
yes.
So how could people grow their Instagram following? Instagram, I'm getting better at, but I need to get better at Instagram. I'm good. I'm solid on Twitter, surprisingly, but I have given up on Facebook because, as you said, Facebook is a pay-to-pay avenue, and then Instagram I need to get better at.
I actually have an Instagram course because you're not alone. You're not the only person who says that. So Instagram, there's a lot of tactics, but number one is great images. That's really important. And number two would be the right hashtags for the image. I can't tell you how many people tag their image with popular hashtags that have nothing to do with their photo, and that is the fastest way to get banned, or shadow banned, as they call it on Instagram, which is when Instagram blocks them, blocks your photos from being seen. So you want to make sure authenticity is really important on Instagram more than anywhere else. And it's really just about doing the research, taking the time, making sure that you find the right hashtags for the audience you want to attract.
It's the know, like, and trust factor.
Yes, that is definitely true. But I think it's more than that. I really believe that Instagram, I come from a TV background, so behind the scenes content has been content that I have leveraged for some of the biggest names in the business, and that is what works for everyone on Instagram, not just celebrities. And I have managed celebrity Instagrams, but it really, behind the scenes content, everybody wants to know how you're going about your day. That's why Instagram stories are so popular. And they also just, people want to people are curious by nature. They want to peek into what makes you tick, and Instagram is a great way to do that.
Yeah. And now I'm going to ask you some of the baseline questions, and you can answer them any way you wish. All of you guys can answer them any way you wish. Victoria, what is your favorite book? It doesn't have to be a business book. It just has to be a book that you go back to time and time again.
The 4 Agreements, but now the updated version, the 5 Agreements, is one of my favorite books.
The 5 Agreements. I have never heard of that. And when you say updated, when did they update it?
I would say fairly, like this year, or maybe this year or last year. I just read it this year, in February in the Denver airport, actually. But yeah, the 4 or 5 Agreements. I started reading it after college, and every few years I reread it. I think it's a great way to understand how you interact in personal, romantic, business, every kind of relationship. It's a great way to really understand your style of interacting and engaging with other human beings.
Well, that is so interesting that you read it in the Denver airport. You know that I'm based out of Aspen, Colorado. Denver's only 4 hours away from me, and the reason why I say that is because they have good bookstores in the Denver airport. My God.
They do. I bought a few books. I also bought, which is now on my nightstand. I'm digital, right? So I read a lot of stuff on my iPad, but sometimes I really like to hold a book. I read the New York Times every weekend. I only get the weekend as a print paper. I actually usually read it in Central Park or Riverside. But yeah, having a real book, and I fell in love with those bookstores. So I actually also bought All In by Stephanie Breedlove, and that sits on my nightstand now, and I will definitely be reading that once a year. It's great for female entrepreneurs who are just starting out, who are on their journey. It really just talks about her journey as an entrepreneur. I didn't even know who she was, and then I read the book, and her company was bought by Care.com, which is actually pretty big here. I don't necessarily know if everybody is familiar with it, but it's a site that helps you find home care workers or babysitters, all that.
I am, and I'm a big fan of theirs. I found help off of Care.com, and they're bigger in major cities, of course, but Care.com is unbelievable. If you guys are looking for help, they have help every which way. They don't have social media help, though. They do have...
No, I got the market on that one.
Yeah. So they don't have social media help, but I'm sure you could get a personal assistant off Care.com and training to do your social media, or hire Victoria to do your social media, whichever you wish.
I actually, thank you for that. But, I actually come across a lot of people, and that's actually a point I'd love to touch on. There's a big difference between hiring a college student or an intern and somebody with a decade of experience. Social media is definitely a science now. It's a lot different than back in the day where if you had content and you were talking about something unique, you could really get far. Now it's a little bit more calculated, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs underestimate how much of an investment they need to make when they build their business in the online portion of it. So that's definitely, that was a good segue.
Well, guess what? You and I are having a meeting on June 21st about my Twitter and possibly about my Instagram because I need help. I need help from Victoria, and I need help, all social media help with needs. So, Victoria.
You're not the only one, though. It's really, and I want people to feel like it's good to ask for the help when you need it, because I think it's definitely something that's more important now. But this is something that I have been living, breathing, eating, sleeping for my whole life. Like, I really have always been social. But I happened to graduate at the right time where this was what I could make my business. I have a journalism degree, so it was natural for me to kind of fall into telling stories on a different medium. But it's not natural for everyone, and that's what I always want people to feel supported in being able to ask for the help without feeling like there are no stupid questions when it comes to social. You're not embedded in it the way that I am or the way that true, efficient, excellent social media managers are, because there definitely are people out there who do a great job, but there are also a lot of people who don't do a great job and who kind of take people's money, which really aggravates me because I don't think that. I don't think that's the right way to be.
Well, I agree with you, and it's funny you mentioned journalism. I'm actually going back to school in the fall for my journalism degree. Finally, it took me 11 years to finally pick my passion, and finally
that's awesome.
Journalism degree. Thank you. But my next question for you is, what is your favorite podcast, if you have one?
I'm really feeling the National Public Radio's Up First. And you might like it. Do you listen to that one?
I do. I listen to that one. I do.
I love it because it's the journalist telling the story of the day.
First, I love it. So if you guys want to go subscribe to Up First, go subscribe. I actually share a story on a podcast interview I did called Supported Sexy about NPR and about why I'm doing what I'm doing today, which a lot of people don't know why I really, truly started this podcast, and it has something to do with NPR, so you guys may want to go listen to my episode on Support is Sexy to really figure it out, and because I'm not sharing that story quite yet on here, but Victoria, I knew you were going to say that because you said something about the New York Times, so I kind of think you were going to say NPR. But NPR counts as a podcast, so that's good.
It does.
And so, Victoria, what has been your favorite entrepreneurial success in all this?
Oh, my favorite. Well, I would have to say that it was the project that I worked on with the United Nations. I was lucky enough to manage the digital brand launch for a report that came out of the Envoy for Special Education's office. And what I did was I built their community. Sorry?
Of course.
Yeah, it was super cool. It was super cool. And, it felt so good. Like, I love to be able to empower people to share a message that has kind of that, global community outreach. And really, it was important to me. It was focused on how we create a society of people who all have the same educational opportunity. And make inclusiveness is a very important thing to me. And I also learned a lot about how you can make websites, and content really for everyone, not just for, really for everybody. And I think that was a big lesson, cause I've gotten used to kind of creating content for journalism, for news, for entertainment. And this was a great experience. So yeah, that would be my biggest win so far, I would say.
Your biggest win so far. And for those of you who don't know, I am a huge advocate for special ed. So Victoria picks the right entrepreneurial moment of that. I don't know if you guys know my story, and Victoria doesn't know my story. I'll give the brief version here. The brief version is I have hemiplegia cerebral palsy, so of course I was stuck in special ed all my life. Well, I shouldn't say stuck. I was integrated in able-bodied classes with able-bodied kids, but I did have the unfortunate advantage of going to special ed classes, and I'm coming to find out that these social media platforms are not very handicapped and accessible. So, Victoria, leads me to my next question. How do you think these influencers who are handicapped should be using these platforms?
Well, so I think that, it is a challenge, right? We only have so many resources. But I do think specifically with Facebook and Twitter now, there's closed captioning, there's audio only, there's so many ways. And if there's audio only, that it's for able-bodied people to think about those experiences, in every capacity. So you have to think about people who maybe can't read the content that you're sharing, or maybe can't hear the content that you're sharing, or can't see the content that you're sharing. And it's not just about able-bodied versus people who are differently abled. It is more about everything, about being truly inclusive. So it's languages, it's content types. Like maybe people only have access to a mobile device. Maybe people can't read or see or interact with your content on a computer. There are plenty of people in the world who don't have access to a desktop computer, things that we in the U.S. often take for granted. So I think it's important to really think about that when you're creating content, especially if you want to have a global impact.
Well, you said that so eloquently that I couldn't speak to that effect even more, because Victoria, you said that so eloquently. And what has been your biggest entrepreneurial challenge in all this?
The biggest challenge, well, thank you also for that. I appreciate it. My little brother did not speak until he was 5. So I come at things from a very, and I grew up in New York, so I have a very interesting worldview. My brother was also, basically what happened was the quick version, they said that he would never speak and that we should both learn sign language. That was the solution. But now you would never know. He has dyslexia and some other learning disabilities. But you would never, ever know that this was a kid who they thought couldn't or wouldn't be able to speak at all. So I feel like because he was in that situation and we fought for him, he was lucky enough to have advocates who fought for him, that now, it's kind of up to me to make sure that other kids in that situation other people, it doesn't have to be children. I think children are more often than not left behind, if you will. But, for me, it's really about focusing on making sure that everybody has access. Everybody. Like if you need support and you want an ally, I'm there to be that person. Not necessarily to speak for you or over you, but I think if you need someone to speak for you or if you need somebody to be louder for you, I'm happy to do that. So that's really where it comes from. I'm not necessarily, I didn't just grow up this way. I had a lot of life experiences that kind of shaped me into that person. But the challenge for me has been about making my work personal without taking it personally. Being a journalist, and you know this, when you tell other people's stories, you kind of take a little bit of that on. And when you are focused on, bringing their product to market, because I do a lot of that, product launches, or putting out there. I work with a lot of talent, so I do a lot of social media for individual people, celebrities, influencers, etc., entrepreneurs. And when I work with those people, me spreading their message it's live or die for them. So it becomes this very personal experience where you're letting me into like kind of your dirty laundry, if you will. And I think that sometimes that residue kind of falls into my own world. And I've had to work on really making it personal without taking it personally. And it's a challenge. It's a work in progress. You know, I can't help if somebody doesn't like what your message is. I can advise you and teach you and guide you. But if people don't want a specific product, you know, I can't force people to eat tacos if they don't want them. You know what I mean? So there's only so much I can do.
Listen to this podcast if they don't want to either.
Right. Right. It's, you know, there's only so much that you could do to get, if people don't want to subscribe or if people don't want to leave you a review, there's only so many tactics that we can try to convince them otherwise.
Yeah.
And often, you know, it feels like a personal failure when I can't get that person to convert, but that happens very rarely. And I've learned that, you know, it's really not on me. It's on finding other fixes for the problem.
Finding other fixes for the problem. And Victoria, I want to know where people can find you and people could get in touch with you. I believe I heard you on another podcast, and my goodness, I'm a podcast junkie, and the podcast name escapes me right now that I heard your story on. But just
that was the podcast.
And what?
She Did It Her Way was the podcast that you heard me on.
Oh, thank you, because immediately after that, okay, She Did It Her Way with Amanda Boleyn, and I fell in love with, this is another good podcast for you guys, She Did It Her Way, and I fell in love with your story. I called you immediately after that and said, Victoria, I heard your podcast. I even practically stopped the podcast to find your information. That's how curious I was about your story. Jeez. There I go. The podcast junkie stops the podcast to find information. She did it her way. Good, because I did leave that on your answering machine. Thank you for reminding me. And
you're welcome. So they
can
find me everywhere. I'm on everything. But if you're looking for me, the best way to find me would be on Instagram on Vix, V-I-X, in the city. That's also my handle on Facebook, Twitter. My website is CreativeVix, CreatiVix, media.com, or just vixinthecity.com, and you'll find me that way. That's really, Vix in the City is the key to everything me.
Vix in the City. And yes, I'm going to ramp up my Instagram, and yes, Victoria is going to help me ramp up my Twitter. And we have a meeting the day before my 30th birthday, so that's one of my birthday presents to myself.
That's
the
wonderful.
Other birthday is going back to school, so
that's
awesome.
My
journal. Great. But before I let Victoria go do more phenomenal work, I want Victoria to ask me 2 to 4 questions that she's been dying to ask me. And Victoria nicely emailed me these questions. So yes, I have thought about them all day, but go ahead, Victoria, and ask me.
So I'm going to start with, because I feel like we touched on a few of these things. But, you know, what's your favorite thing about hosting a podcast, Wynn? Tell me about that.
Interviewing people like you, interviewing rock stars like you, and talking about my story and sharing people's stories. That's why I'm going into this journalism degree, because I'm curiosity kills the cat here. I love to pry and sneak into people's lives in a not so sneaky way, and yeah.
Awesome. And how do you find the right audience online? I'm always fascinated by how people connect with their tribe.
I use Twitter, and I promote every time I publish a podcast. It goes every time I publish this podcast and my other podcast, Wisdom of Fashion. It goes to Facebook. It goes to Twitter. It goes to YouTube. It goes to every which way. So automatically, so people have heard of me or heard of my name. So, because my story is so influential, no pun intended, but I asked people, here's my secret. I say, can I interview you on Twitter? And 9 times out of 10, I'm on it, and then we start the conversation from there. And then if I get, I'm too busy, let's circle back, I'll circle back. So that's how I find people.
Awesome. And, you obviously follow a lot of people, and what I want to know is not necessarily just what attracts you to their content, but what do you think makes a good digital influencer? What do you think makes somebody worth following?
Okay. Now I'm going to say this publicly from a disabled perspective and from a podcast perspective with no disability. They say content is king, and as long as you're active on Twitter and retweeting everything under the sun and not making it the Win show or the Victoria show, you're pretty much set on Twitter. But I like people that inspire me, and people seem to like my content, so then they share it with the audience. One of the things I ask my interviewees to do is share it with the audience. That's how I've got over 40,000 downloads of my podcast. And so that's what attracts me to a good social media influencer, and I feel like I'm getting to the point where I'm a good social media influencer, so I think.
I love that, because I really think it's about inclusiveness, right? It's about making a community and actually engaging with that community in a two-way manner. I think that's totally the point, and I love hearing that from you, because now I could say, yes, people totally agree with me. It's not just a gut feeling. It's definitely accurate and true.
Yes, because they say content is king. They say if people will stick with bad audio as long as the content is king. And people need to know that the Twitter is all me. It's going to be all me once I hit the New York Times bestseller list with my book. Yes, I said New York Times bestseller list as a New York Times bestseller, and also with cerebral palsy. No one is going to touch my Twitter. My Twitter's all me. Facebook and Instagram may be a different story, but I feel like if I let someone touch them other than me, I would probably let Victoria touch it first, because she knows what she's doing. She knows how to get those retweets other than anyone else, because a lot of people in the social media space steal a lot of money and then don't produce the work, as Victoria and I touched on. And so basically, Victoria, I'm telling you right now, when I hit the New York Times bestseller list, guess who I'm calling? You. Why are you? Because I feel like you know what you're doing.
Well, thank you so much for that compliment. I very much appreciate it. I think that
I'm serious about that.
No, I love it. I think that that's definitely, I think it's important, that whole piece where you talk about how it's you. Even if you have a really great social media manager, I like to say that I can chameleon into other people. So you should have somebody who is a chameleon, who can become you. Nobody should know that it's somebody else. That's the most important thing. And one final thing that I would like to say is that if content is king, then I believe the community is queen. And we all know that the queen is more powerful than the king.
Yes, I love it. I love it. And that's a wonderful way to end this interview. And I apologize for the noise in the background. That's what you get when recording an interview from a cell phone in New York. You get taxi in the background.
I apologize. I was just getting out of the cab. I thought it would last the whole time, but yeah.
I'm going to leave that in for sound effects just so we know where we are. And so I'm going to leave that background noise in because see, that's how you do it. You do social media on the go. You do a podcast interview on the go too. Geez.
I'm always in a cab. or a Via or so. I'm always in motion. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, you're always in motion. Well, again, I thank Victoria for coming on my podcast, even though she didn't stop doing this podcast, please. And so this podcast has been sponsored by Tinder, KITVER, and what they can do is they can either compose a tweet for you or you can compose a tweet, but they put the trending hashtags with it so influencers see it and you don't get lost in the heap. And I thank Victoria for coming on my podcast. And again, my podcast is Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. So as soon as Victoria gets linked, I know exactly what she's going to do. She's going to share it on social media. And her information will be in the show notes. And you guys know how to get to show notes. You guys click on the podcast artwork of any podcast. And depending if the podcast host has put show notes in that automatically flips over. And so again, I thank Victoria, and I hope you guys enjoyed another fabulous episode of Butterflies of Wisdom. Thanks to you guys.
Thank you so much. Win? Win?